as a crucial development in the history of the United Nations. The Australian Government's support of the Declaration marks an important transformation in the attitudes that have existed regarding the recognition of Indigenous Australians' collective rights. The Australian Government's support of the Declaration is a practical contribution to our domestic reconciliation process. We commend the Australian Government for their statement that the right of self-determination in Article 3 is to be applied consistently with its binding legal obligations in the ICCPR and the ICESCR. We note that in giving their support to the Declaration, the Government has stated that Australia's existing obligations under international human rights treaties are mirrored in the Declaration's fundamental principles. While supporting the Declaration is a positive initiative, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations of Australia are concerned about the ambiguous nature of the Australian Government's support. In particular, we note that the Government's interpretation of free, prior and informed consent is inconsistent with existing international law. The recent establishment of a national consultative process for the potential development of a Charter of Human Rights in Australia is another positive initiative of the Australian Government. It is the position of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples Organisation of Australia that a statutory Charter of Rights needs to be established and must annex all international human rights instruments that have been signed onto, including the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. While there is no certainty that a Charter of Rights will ever be adopted in Australia, the Government should be applauded, creating a process through which its citizens can engage in a dialogue on this issue. The critical challenge now facing Indigenous peoples and the nation states in setting of the benchmarks, which can be used as practical measurement on the extent of the enjoyment of the rights contained in the Declaration. This requires a commitment by and the collaboration of all actors in this debate, facilitated by the ongoing leadership that is being provided by the Permanent Forum. Such benchmarks should not be seen by governments simply as a means through which they can be criticised for not meeting their obligations. Benchmarks can and should be seen as adding value to development and implementation of future government policy. An important first step in the implementation of the Declaration at both the international and domestic level will require consideration of how to achieve best practice in the way UN agencies and governments engage with Indigenous peoples. If engagement is simply used by UN agencies and governments as a modern-day euphemism for consultation with Indigenous peoples, it is difficult to imagine that our respective relationships will improve. Indigenous peoples claim to have a collective right to self-determination. It is not simply about taking a belligerent stand against governments for the invasion and colonisation of their lands and territories. It is based on our understanding that we are best placed to make the decisions that affect our lives and the future of our peoples. Madam Chairperson, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Organisations of Australia recommend that the Permanent Forum, with the support of the Interagency Support Group, undertake an international consultative process with Indigenous peoples on the proposed concept of diplomacy, that is, to consider ways in which instruments such as the Declaration can be used to develop more effective models of engagement with Indigenous peoples. We recommend also that the Permanent Forum supports a study to elaborate on Article 3 of the Declaration. And the third recommendation is that the Permanent Forum engages with the United Nations Development Programme and the International Parliamentarians Union to elaborate on models to guide Indigenous peoples on exercise of our rights to develop under Article 23. Thank you.